Hello and welcome everybody. As Leah said, I am indeed Ken Cole with the National Guild for Community Arts Education. And the Guild's mission is to support and advance lifelong learning opportunities in the arts for all Americans. And we pursue that mission in concert with 450 member organizations and a larger constituency of several thousand nonprofit arts education providers, which include community art schools, art centers, education divisions of museums and performing arts organizations all across the country to ensure that all Americans have equitable access to arts education. Remember 2009, right? Not a happy time. The depths of the Great Depression, or Great Recession. It was also a time when the Kresge Foundation made a grant to the Guild to investigate innovations, best practices, and effective business models that can improve the effectiveness and sustainability of nonprofit arts education providers. With Kresge's support, the Guild engaged Wolf Brown to help conduct an investigation. And our process included a literature review, a field-wide survey, multiple focus groups, and interviews with thought leaders across the country. Through those efforts, we discovered many examples of organizations that were doing more and doing better, even in the Great Recession, both for themselves and for their communities. And they were doing that by collaborating and by ensuring that they were responding to community priorities. And as that investigation unfolded over the next couple of years, we also had the great good fortune of getting to know Gigi Antoni and the organization she leads, Big Thought. And it soon became clear to us that Big Thought had reached much the same conclusion through their work in Dallas. So we thought, why not partner with Big Thought to publish a book about collaboration with Gigi and Tom Wolfe as the authors? So the resulting publication, More Than the Sum of Its Parts, Collaboration and Sustainability in Arts Education, is what brings us here today. More Than the Sum, and Gigi, if we can move to the hypothesis slide, More Than the Sum puts forth a hypothesis that when, did I pronounce that correctly? Puts forth a hypothesis that when arts education organizations work together with other entities to address broad community needs, they become stronger, widen their impact, and become more relevant and sustainable. The book addresses the full spectrum of collaboration, from simple vendor relations to institutional partnerships to mergers, all the way to collaborative cross-sector systems work that leverages collective impact to ensure that all kids in their community are receiving arts education. The book aims to inspire arts education leaders to think anew about how much more we can accomplish together through collaboration. It's now my very sincere pleasure to introduce to you one of the great minds driving this work, one of the authors of More Than the Sum, and the president and CEO of Big Thought, Gigi Antoni. Gigi?
So, boy, I never thought I'd ever hear myself referred to as a great mind, but we'll see about that. I just want to say thank you. I'm incredibly honored to be here, and mostly I'm really honored to represent the work of my community. And what I'm going to talk with you about today is done by a lot of leaders in Dallas, and I happen to be the person here talking to you today, but there are many people in my city who could talk about this work and why we think it's important. So I just kind of want to start with why we, as a community, felt that it was so important that we think differently about how we're providing arts education to our students. So I just want to start with just a few kind of statistics. So what you're looking at here is that between 1982 and 2008, the provision of who is getting arts education and who isn't in our community. And I think it's a pretty stunning slide. And I think that, we think often that we don't have comprehensive arts education for American children, but the truth is we do. It's just some children that we don't have comprehensive arts education for. This, coupled with this slide, which talks about what happens to the amount of money that's being spent in public education, for children living in poverty and children who aren't. And the spread here is huge. It's between $4,000 a child and $13,000 a child. And so we know that money plays a big role in whether you have arts in your school or not, and the provision of money and the budgets at our public schools often is an indicator of whether or not that is a priority or it isn't. And then couple it with this study, which is from 1972 through 2006, and this looks at what families are spending to supplement their children's education, right? To look for enrichment activities and the amount of money that families are spending on that. And so you can see our high-income households are spending much more money today than they were several decades past, where our kids that are living in poverty haven't even kept up with the rate of inflation. So if you think about those three things together, there's just this tremendous opportunity gap. And it is centered mostly in our urban centers and in our rural communities is where we see this dynamic playing out. And so as a community, we got together to think about how do we make sure that it doesn't matter what zip code you live in or who you are in our community, that you have opportunities as you grow up in Dallas to experience and engage in high quality arts learning. And we thought about it along this continuum, thinking about the role of arts in developing young people and helping parents understand the importance of music and creativity, theater and exploration, even for very, very young children, and then how that role changes that the arts can play in developing young people as they get older, all the way to how those skills and capacities help children succeed in life and as adults. The only way for us to really build the kind of political will that we needed to have this conversation at the scale we wanted to have it, we had to think about what are the roles that arts play? Where can the arts become part of a larger civic conversation about our civic agenda for our city and what we care about as a whole city, not just the arts people, right? We all get it. It's about all the other people in our community that we need to get on board to understand the value of this and why it's important. And so in the book, we kind of talk about a big urban city and where the mayor might think about how the arts, a classroom teacher might think about the power of the arts, how someone in a hospital might think about how the arts could help add value in unconventional ways outside of the classroom. We understood that when we looked at kids who had high arts experiences, it didn't just happen in school. Actually, high arts kids are learning arts not just in buildings called schools and not just between 8 and 3 o'clock. We found in our studies that actually there was a tremendous amount of arts learning happening in places that were invisible to us. The highest provider of dance instruction in my city are churches. It was surprising when we did our asset mapping and we took a look at where arts learning was happening. And so it really broadened our thinking about who's the teacher of the arts, where can the arts happen in our community, how do we connect all of this and think about it as a connected piece. And there are many other organizations in the country, as we were doing this book, that we found are doing similar work and thinking in similar ways. This partnership, there's lots of different kinds of partnerships. It was fascinating working on the book with Tom at how they sort of come together. So you have cross-sector partnerships like this one with Carnegie. And this partnership is in a hospital, and they have different reasons that they've come together. So Carnegie is doing this work because they believe in the transformative power of music to change people's lives. And they're interested in vulnerable populations and how music can do that in those places. So the hospital is looking at a different set of outcomes, perhaps, than Carnegie. They're thinking about how do they engage their patients in activities that calm them, that feed their spirit, that help them through this difficult time. And so that's a place where those two agendas come together beautifully. I would call this a cross-sector partnership that is primarily programmatic in nature. But when we're talking about big systems, right, and you're talking about aligning across multiple sectors. Go ahead and click the next one. What you're really looking at are all the places where these organizations in your city have these programmatic partnerships, these little blue dots that are going on in your community. I had a superintendent once that called these, from his perspective, random acts of improvement. So from the superintendent's perspective, these were great programs, but he would say, I have no obligation to serve any child. I have an obligation to serve every child. So bring me interventions that have that capacity. And so as a community, as we come together, all of us, and look at our fantastic random acts of improvement and begin to coordinate those and align them, most importantly, to these larger civic outcomes. So these 4 boxes at the top of this slide are in my city's plan, their strategic plan for the city. These are the city's 4 objectives. These are the things, the goals that they're focusing their resources, their time, and their measurement on. And I would submit that the arts have a role to play in a city achieving these 4 very important outcomes for a city. And so part of the collective action in the arts education is about aligning all the partnerships, cross-sector, cross-disciplinary, all sorts of applications in all kinds of places in a coordinated way where we can see that kids have access in their neighborhoods, in their schools. This partnership is called Thriving Minds in Dallas. And what we've achieved in the last decade includes putting art specialists back in our schools, getting policies in place that set minimum standards of instruction in the arts across all of our urban school district, writing a new fine arts curriculum, building an out-of-school time system that includes schools and neighborhoods for after school, and working in summer learning loss interventions. That's what we've accomplished as a community across the city at scale. So 160,000 children, many of them every day, receive experiences in the arts across Dallas through this program. I'm going to show you an example of a short video of a collective action around summer learning loss. This summer learning loss intervention is started in 2010. In 2011, we began to work with 5 other cities and the Wallace Foundation and RAND to take a look at how the impact of this might look over time. So we know kids lose learning every summer. We know the loss is cumulative. We know it's hard to get kids to to engage in summer learning. And so by bringing the arts in, we're able to do more than we could do separately. When you watch this, I want you to look at all the partners that have come together to make this happen. You're going to see the police, you're going to see Parks and Rec, you're going to see many cultural partners, you're going to see teaching artists, fine arts specialists, general classroom teachers, central staff at the district. You're going to see the city. You'll see how all the pieces come together to do something that none of us could ever have done alone, separately.
Well, Dallas is an amazing place. There are men and women who care about the next generation of leaders.
And when you have a group of committed people who are willing to work together and want to do something different, it can be done. Summer school was primarily and purely academic, and so this year we got involved because the focus of summer school changed.
Where we focus on a project-based integrated approach to learning.
So summer camp should reflect a time of fun, a time of exploration, a time for seeing things differently in different environments.
Project, you created this. These are your words to help them shape it. They feel better than I say, here, read this out loud.
We started off with the core curriculum content directors, and they helped us determine what those key concepts were that we needed to address during the summer camp. Then we brought in teachers. We had a national expert, Tristan DeFranville, come in and work with those teachers to help them figure out how to incorporate those skills into the projects.
By creating a great project.
The design for elementary school camp was a repeat of what we had done in elementary classes a year before. Bring the academic teachers into the classroom for the first part of the day to review material that they had looked at in their English and language arts classes or their math classes, etc. And then to bring the experiences of working with creative teams, visual artists, dancers, musicians, theater, performing artists, to explore and to enhance those academic ideas so that they are able to look at them a different way.
At the middle school, we wanted to extend the project-based integrated approach, and we did that by adding an exploratory period to summer school.
The exploratory coaches were required to find out from all the students their spark. What excites them in life, in their general daily life. So we can target them to say, okay, if this is what you really like on your off time, we're going to help you focus on a career path, find something that really excites you and gives you a reason to stay in school.
I think it's really smart and totally relevant to get kids outside and engaged with nature, and to have experiential learning opportunities where they can see things happening before their eyes. We need them to consider conservation as a career.
The first 2 weeks, with about 2,000 middle school students, went to their home schools. They were in traditional classrooms with their teachers. We were able to send artists and send experts into the classroom to begin to work with them on their academic requirements.
Let's talk about our second soil sample.
The second 2 weeks, we turned Fair Park into a middle school campus.
Basically, they've taken the automobile building, which is a shell building, and basically created classroom settings in there. Then we also had to work out all the logistics. How were the buses going to arrive? Where were they going to drop off? Security, all of those issues that are key to successful programs. The idea of doing a summer camp at Fair Park, where all the junior high kids from various schools would come and learn at Fair Park and have classes, and then be able to use Fair Park as a lab for science projects at the lagoon, or working with the automotive history on engine combustion or whatever. It was rather an intriguing idea, and so we basically put together a plan to try to make that work and accommodate that.
One of the days of this 8-day period in Fair Park was an event called Fair Park Live.
This is the career path I want to choose, and I worked hard and I studied hard and I pursued that.
And it was a day when the community responded to the interest that we learned that kids had.
And we wanted to be a part of it to help enrich these students during the summer camp and let them know what the world and the profession of accounting has to offer.
There's some places where they show them ventures and see what they do for their job. It's real fun. It was real fun.
The most important thing is when I visited campuses and when I visited Fair Park, I saw students who were engaged.
Why are we waiting? Yeah, our kids don't have time to wait. Let's get out there and let's do it. Let's do something different. Let's expose them and get their hands dirty and get our hands dirty.
And if we do our jobs right, then kids know that we care about them. The world keeps changing. Kids are changing. Kids can think. Let's give them a chance to do that.
%10 of the children across our school district, pre-K, kindergarten through 8th grade, who are in danger of not matriculating to the next year. So it very clearly aligns with an educated workforce, right, on that big and successful students, but it also includes family engagement, neighborhood engagement, so it sort of crosses over into that community, successful families and strong families work as well. This staff that does this program, it's about 1,000 adults. It includes volunteers from business, 70 businesses partner on this project. It includes AmeriCorps volunteers, artists, scientists, historians, lots of folks. Institutions at Fair Park, we have the African American Museum, the Women's Museum, our Texas History Museum, our Science Museum. All of those assets are in that park as well. And it includes classroom teachers, obviously, and art specialists as well. So those are the 1,000 people that we train to go in and to do that with. So here I just want to talk a little bit about how you do this work, because I'm a practitioner. I'm not really a, what did you say, a great mind. I'm a practitioner, right? You know, I'm about doing this every day and figuring out how to make it work on the ground. And so here are some things that we have found over the last 15 years or so that we've been doing this collective action impact work that are important to think about. And the first is that when you bring your community together to have conversations like this, you have to plan from a place of abundance. You have to be explicit and go, you know, today we're not going to worry about how we're going to pay for this. We're not going to worry about the political restraints that might keep us from accomplishing this. We're just going to talk about kids and what we want to do for kids and how we can get that work done. And imagine that you don't have to worry about those things. What would you do? Really, really important. The second is the bureaucracy issue, right? So it's really helpful to do this work as best you can, human to human. You know, whether you're talking to somebody at the city, or keep it informal until you have to sign the MOU, or you've got to deal with risk management, or you've got to have the letter of agreement, or whatever it is. You know, make things happen with as little red tape and bureaucracy as possible. And this is where a private 501c3 can be really helpful to big bureaucracies, because they go, oh, we really want to do this, but it's really laborious to get everybody you know, vetted through our system. So why don't you hire those people, right? And we'll take care of this side of it. So that's a helpful way to think about how to get through the red tape. Don't duplicate capacity in the system. So this is where partners begin to disengage. If they feel like you're building the capacity somewhere else to do something that they have an expertise in, you're really not being more than the sum of your parts, right? At that point, you're building more redundancy. A really good example in this summer program, the kids are with us from 7:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the afternoon. Prior to our collaboration, the kids got 4 hours of remediation. That's what we could afford when we were doing random acts of improvement. When we came together, we could give the kids a whole day, and we could give them breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because food insecurity is a big issue in the summer for our kids in our public school. But the federal money can only pay for 2 meals a day. And so we had to figure out how we were going to cover that third meal. So rather than doing that ourselves in the nonprofit sector, we just reached out to the food bank. And so we had this problem. We got 25,000 kids. We need to feed them every day for 6 weeks. Can you help us? And they serve hot meals to these kids. They have dinner before they go home at the end of the day. And all it took was asking the question and a handshake. In 45 minutes, we had solved the problem in one meeting. So that's don't duplicate. Look for the right partner to help you get it done. This concept of enabling constraints is a really important one. So, you know, in our Arts Partners program, which is one of our in-school system programs that we run, you know, we looked at best practice for training teachers and artists to work together in integration in the classroom. And when you look at best practice across the country, the training kind of looks like this. You take a whole faculty of teachers and a group of artists in the summer or sometime for a week for a very intensive experience planning, and everybody gets really excited about this, and they go back to their school, and then they have guided practice, supported practice. We had to figure out how to do that with 6,000 classroom teachers at a scale that was not going to allow us to train people in that way. It was just too big, too many. And so we had to think about, rather that as a barrier to quality, how did that enable us to think about that differently, to use the best practice, but to make it at a scale that we could hope to get similar quality. So that's enabling constraints. They're just things and systems that are different, and you have to think of them as a creative opportunity to think about it differently. The other is barriers and deal breakers. So when you're working with a lot of agendas, right, all these partners, they're all there for a reason. And it's really important that everyone's this boat rise, right? That everybody's getting stronger and better. And so there's a reason they're at that table as a partner. And asking explicitly, what is it you need to get out of this collaboration? What's the deal breaker that would make you push away from the table and say, I've had it? Because this is hard work, right? It's harder than doing it alone. What would make you push away from the table? And to really have that conversation and let it be all right that you go, look, I'm not getting the branding I need around this or the visibility, I'm not getting the financial support I need around it. What are the things that are keeping people from engaging? And then one of my favorites is bless and release. So there's a point in this process where you get really focused on what's going to happen and how is this thing going to get pulled off or get done. And you're going to make decisions as a community that are going to exclude options that might have at one time been on the table. Like this one in the summer. We wanted to do this all the way through high school, but we just didn't have the resources to do it that way. And so we stopped at 8th grade. And when we did that, there were people in the room who didn't have 8th grade programming or capacity. And so they were no longer a part of the conversation. And it needs to be okay for people to go, I love this, but it's not for me, right? It's not gonna work. And we wish them well, and we're gonna miss them, and there may be a time when they come back in the partnership, but we try to keep that moving. This is my 6-question test for would you partner with us? Do we really have the capacities to do the things that we think we want to do together? Can we offer what we're being asked to do? Sometimes we want our kids to learn how to do mediation. And the answer is that isn't what we do. We're not your people for that. But we'll figure out who the partner is and we'll help you, get that going. Do the finances work in our mutual advantage? So often if you're a nonprofit, you may be working with a big public entity and you may end up, being asked to do something that is just beyond your means, and the public entity might go, well, we don't have any money with their $2 billion budget and your $100,000 budget. So there has to be an understanding that this has to be mutually beneficial financially. Can we gain community trust by working together? So there are partners that you might say no to. You're like, this is not the Thriving Minds Cuervo summer camp. So you have to think about the funding, you have to think about the partners, you have to think about what is the, can we build our community trust together by doing this work together? It's an important consideration. Can we do what we do better together than we could do separately? Again, this work is hard. It takes a lot of time. And, it needs to have an impact beyond your own effort to make it really worth it. And then the really last one is, can we get along? And it is a very human process, this process. And so when you're partnering with institutions whose values don't align with the values of your institution, that can be really problematic. And even if all the wheels turn right, it still doesn't work. It's just really difficult. So it's a good question to ask. What are our cultures? Are we going to be able to meld our cultures? Do we understand we're all going to have to compromise and change, in order to get this work right? And are you dealing with people who get that and are willing to do it? I want to just point to this effort in Boston, which is really spearheaded by the superintendent there. And I want you just to kind of take a look on the slide at the process that they used, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of doing this. So you can see that there was a lot of listening in the beginning, right? She surveyed, they listened to what folks in the community thought they needed, they did asset mapping, and doing that evaluation in the front is important, very important. Looking at interviews, all of that, and then the action. So what are we going to do? We're going to build a searchable database. We're going to address what we heard. And this process is really important. And every one of these I've ever seen, and every one that I've ever been involved in, has this sort of flow, right? Where first there's the information gathering, really, really important. And some of that is data, but some of it's also conversation, holding conversations, talking to the folks that you want to deliver to and the folks you want to engage in the partnership. And through that, you get the ability to create this powerful idea. What is the idea that we're going to come around? And how are we going to know if we've gotten there? What are our metrics? What are we going to know at the end of the day that we did it, right? And we all agree on that together. And then designing the interventions, what are we going to do, right? So you saw Carol Johnson's, the searchable database, the expansion, that sort of thing. Once you get to that point, you're doing this rest of this over and over again, right? So you try it out. At least 20% of what you try to do will fail, right? Because you're innovating, so you have to have a failure quotient that you're comfortable with. Because some of it's not going to work. And you do that, and then you start scaling. And as you're scaling out, you're going to get more things that don't work. Things that worked in the beginning when you were in 13 or 14 campuses will fall apart at 77. There'll be something in the way you design the delivery that you didn't realize scale was an issue. And you'll have to go back and think about that again. When you do these, you have to design from scale. It's not about, let's get 5 perfect and then we'll replicate them. It's about how do you design something that's going to scale fairly quickly. You know, within 4 to 5 years, you're going to be at whatever your definition of scale is for that. Or you get in this thing where you're just planning forever and it doesn't really ever kind of go. And then people disengage because there's not enough momentum. And that's the keeping people aboard the moving train. So you have to just sort of keep engaging people and really watch who's leaving off and how do you pull them back in, how do you re-engage. So that is sort of the big ideas. And I think that Ken is gonna help us maybe with some questions.
Yes, well,
thank you all.
Gigi. Yeah. So you've given us a lot to think about, and there's a lot of great ideas packed into this presentation. We do have some questions that have come in, and if you guys here in the room with us have some questions, you want to just write them on the blue card and pass them to Lindsay. She'll get them up to us. If you're watching online, you can tweet to #MoreThanTheSum or use the question box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. So, Gigi, one of the things, one of the questions has to do with mindset shift. How does an organization, you know, a lot of the organizations that Opera America serves, that the Guild serves, they're founded by entrepreneurs, people with a single-minded vision and real focus and drive to build something. Does it require a shift in mindset to go from that kind of perspective to one that you need to collaborate? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I'll just speak from my own experience, but I have seen this happening in other cities and in other places as well. So it's really mission driven. If the shift is mission driven, the mission of my organization is to make imagination a part of everyday learning. And we used to do that in a different way. But this was a better way to meet that mission, right? Because there was really the possibility of scaling this and actually making imagination a part of everyday learning for every kid. And although, you know, there are pros and cons to this, you lose a lot of control. You have to not think about the how, like, you know, you sort of have to be agnostic about pedagogy and about where things happen, and you know, so you lose a lot of control, but you gain a lot of richness. And at the end of the day, I am absolutely, it has been literally the most powerful thing I've ever experienced professionally, is this shift of mind. And I see that in my partners as well. And we often talk about how rewarding it is when we work together, even though it's difficult and it's time consuming and it's hard. So I think that shift, as long as it's about the mission, if you work together, can your organization achieve its mission more broadly, more sustainably in partnership than it can working on its own? And I think if you can get right with that, then you're willing to let go of some of the things you've done before, and think about how you can create new experiences that move that mission forward.
Thanks. You also mentioned the capacity to partner, and how, what muscles, what capacities does an organization need to build to be able to do this kind of work?
So I mean, look at the partnerships that you just kind of saw and that we've talked about. So there are lots of different levels that people engage in partnering. Some of them engage at a programmatic level, and they have the capacity to do that. Some of them engage at a planning or program design, the curriculum and designing the experience that the kids are going to have, across a span of time. And then there's the function of a backbone agency. And that's what Big Thought does. We're the managing partner of this partnership. And so it's our capacity to do our job. There's no question that it does cost money to collaborate and partner. It's not free. It's not something you just tack on to somebody's job and go, oh, go, do this while you're doing these other things. It's somebody has to breathe it, eat it, sleep it, think about it in the shower, own it, right? and so you do have to build some capacity to do that. And then people have to shift capacity. I mean, there's a lot of resource shifting that's happened. This summer program that you looked at actually cost maybe 10% more to do this way than it did how we were spending our money in random access improvement. So it wasn't about money, right? It was about the capacity to think and do it differently and to have dedicated leadership to pulling it together and writing the notes up of the minutes and making sure it's communicated out to everyone. That function is important, and you have to build the capacity for that, and to raise money, and to evaluate, and to, right, the list kind of goes on.
So to that end, we've had a couple of questions relating to funding and how does this work get paid for? And you mentioned the programming, the summer programming that the video showed, you said really only increased the cost by about 10%. But the work that Big Thought does, the coordinating work, the partnership work, how do you grow? We're talking about growing impact, serving more kids. The pie grows.
It has to grow.
It has to grow, but also things in the pie, the ingredients get shifted around a little bit.
Right.
So could you talk a little bit about that?
So the best way to talk about this is to look back at the very first one of these we did, which was in 1997. And what this program does is it brings all the city's cultural assets. It's about 1,800 different programs that are offered by all of our cultural institutions for schools and coordinates them so that every kid and every teacher has access to 2 or 3 of those experiences every year, pre-K through 6th grade. So that's the first program that we did with that. That program they're all public-private partnerships. They're all funded publicly and privately. So you're leveraging existing tax dollars, Title I, Title II, transportation, English language money, pre-K money, all of the stuff that's being used, and you're raising private sector money to fill that gap. So with this program that I'm describing, Arts Partners, this program has, for the last 15 years, put about $2 million in public money into the hands of our cultural partners to serve children in our public schools. And that money is generated. So it was like $1.50 a kid before Arts Partners. Now it's $15 a kid, right? That's the public allocation. So we were able to grow the pie exponentially. When we started 15 years ago, young audiences had about 50% of the market of what was going into schools. Within 3 years, that percentage was 10%, but it was twice the volume that was being done before. So it is about finding strategies to grow that pie. The public money, or the private money, is about building the capacity, the evaluation tools, the technology, the professional development, the curriculum, all the things that stay. But the public money is about the direct delivery of services to kids. And we keep that on the public side because, first of all, that's their job, right? It's not the private sector job. And secondly, the program isn't sustainable with private money if the direct instruction is being paid for with private funds. It's just not a sustainable model.
Thanks. So we noted earlier that some of these efforts, you've been working for at least 15 years in Dallas and Big Thought, and there have been efforts going on in Los Angeles and Boston and other cities. As the Any Given Child initiative, we're working with 10 to 14 cities across the country. But how might this play out differently in a city like New York, where we have this vast arts and arts education ecosystem, compared to Dallas, compared to a smaller city, Chattanooga maybe. What kind of difference does the location, the local ecosystem?
So I've thought about this a lot, and I get to talk to lots of cities, and it's really fascinating to see, because you can't just pick a model up and put it in another city. That's not how it works. It has to be the city's deal, right? And it's different depending on them. The ones that just blow my mind are New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And because scale counts. I mean, when you're doing this, scale is a deal. There are a lot of cities like Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and St. Louis and Baltimore. There's lots of cities that are in that sort of range. But these three are really, really kind of, challenging. There are enabling constraints, right? But it's interesting. There are conversations that are starting in some cities that are around certain sectors, like juvenile justice. How do we, those of us in the city who work in that realm, how do we come together around a particular, issue? And I think that may be one of the keys. Will be to see if there are people in these larger cities that can think about how you would slice this to get started. Because what I showed you in the after school program is the biggest, most complicated one of these that we do. And we started with something much simpler, right? Much, much simpler. And have built on it over 15 or so years now. So now we have the capacities to do some of this larger kind of work. Summer, I think, is another interesting place to think about starting, because it's a finite amount of time. You can look at scale by thinking about the kids who need it most, and work together in a slice. And I think that might be an interesting way for larger cities to think about how to apply this.
Great. We also have a question about quality. You touched on this a bit earlier, but when you're scaling up, how do you ensure quality?
So there's a real tension that goes back and forth. Like those of you that run agencies, there's always a tension between the program department and the development department. There's this thing that happens. You want it to be a healthy tension. You don't want it to get too out of balance. Well, that happens in this work too. There's a tension between scale, your access goal, and your quality goal. And if you're going for equity, it's those two things. Like if you have access but no quality, that isn't equity, right? So equity is access and quality. And then how does that play out? So we have put mechanisms, feedback loops into our system that help us measure and look at quality, not just as individual providers, but as a field across the system. There's a website called creatingquality.org that it looks at the work of how we do that, how we have a rubric for quality, how we send researchers into the field to take a look at quality. We do it every 3 months. And so we can see on our rubric, how are we doing across the system in the classroom in terms of delivery of quality. But quality has a lot of dimensions. There's the quality of the program design, there's the quality of the lunch that's being served. There's a lot that goes into it. But when we're really talking about arts instruction, we want to take a look at how does that look. And in a really large system, there's always some really not really great stuff that you want to go do something about. There's great, fantastic stuff, and then there's this continuum across. And so what we try to focus on is how do we keep having that conversation. Steve Seidel wrote a great study, The Qualities of Quality, that really inspired this tool that we built to just make sure we're having a conversation about quality all the time. And that in itself is beginning to move the needle on quality across the system.
We have a question from somebody watching online, but how do you get the conversation started, and particularly with civic leaders?
It is really, we're so blessed in this field to have organizations like the Arts Education Partnership and the Guild and Wallace and other places where we can look at other places that are doing this successfully with metrics around it that we can carry to our civic leaders. But the real key is not to have an arts conversation with them. The key is to have a civic priority conversation with them and to look at the money that's being invested in the arts community and how can that be leveraged towards these larger civic goals. That's the conversation that happens at the leadership level in the city. It isn't about, I once had another superintendent who said, we see you arts people and this is how we see you. You're like a bunch of little baby birds in a nest going, feed me, no feed me, no feed me. And at the city level or the district level, they just don't have time for that. They really don't. That's not a conversation that you can go have a serious conversation with a superintendent from that place. If you can go to a superintendent and say, we are 120 agency strong coalition, and we're here to help you reach your highest priorities. We have a plan, we're organized, we're working together. We have something to offer to this big civic conversation. So it isn't an organizational agenda, it is a civic agenda. And that is the big mind shift, is, we are stronger, we have more of a political voice, we have more influence, we have more power as a sector than we will ever have as individual agencies or organizations. And so it is, that's really where the juice is. I mean, if you tried to take art specialists out of schools in Dallas, the school board meeting would be overrun by people, parents, arts leaders, board leaders, saying you can't do this, our kids deserve it. And that only happens when we're working as a group and we're mobilized.
You're able to attract more attention.
Absolutely, and you can't be ignored if you're 120 agencies talking to a superintendent. They really can't just go, sorry, I don't have time to meet with you. I mean, they really can't say that.
Let's talk a little bit about the for-profit sector. We saw an example of a representative from Ernst & Young in that video. How do you get those guys engaged?
They're the best, and it also helps you raise money, right? So they are in many cities, in most cities that I've ever seen or talked to, they are dying for a way to be useful and helpful in public education. They want to volunteer, they want to connect, they want to be helpful. But like us, when we're one agency knocking on the door, it's hard to get access, to figure out how to help, what to do. Many businesses are discouraged with interacting with public education. They send their volunteers, they show up, and that nobody knows what to do with them. So it is so easy to get the business community. All you have to do is invite them and tell them what you need them to do, and they will come out in spades. In the summer program, we have 80 businesses that send their employees for 2 days to interact with groups of 10 children at a time in 20-minute time frames all day long for 2 days. They love it, and we love it. One of the really early things we did when we were talking to the community, we did focus groups in neighborhoods and all around. Hundreds of people we talked to, and we wanted to explore this issue of naming, right, and branding, and what was going to resonate with the whole spectrum of people that we needed to engage and talk to. And so we asked questions about, well, tell me, is your family artistic? Do you partake of the arts? How do you do that? We wanted to find out how people were using the assets in the city. We got so knocked down, the wind was knocked out of us. The word art was so misunderstood. It was something you hang on a wall. It was something for other people, not me. It was something for rich people. The list just went on and on. All of the things that we know, right, are kind of out there, just came hitting us in the face. But when we talked about imagination and creativity, it just poured out. I remember being in a focus group with a group of inner city mothers talking about, do you think art is important for your kids? And it was, yeah, it's a good thing, fine, whatever. When we talked about creativity, self-expression, imagination, there was one woman who was literally weeping, talking about how her kid was sent to school every day, drilled on these tests, pounded, and that she just wanted them to know who they were and what their spirit, really powerful conversations in the community about the power that we know is the power of the arts, but the language was wrong and off-putting. So our name is Big Thought, and our program is called Thriving Minds. And we are people who are purveyors of creative learning. And that's the way that we framed and branded this community initiative. And again, that's hard to let go of that art education and all of those things that we understand what we're talking about. But it was more important to talk to other people than it was to talk to us. And so we made that decision to go in that direction. And it actually was, I think, in hindsight, a good move for us in a lot of ways. It's a big enough tent that everybody can come in it. Bank of America can come in it. The Y can see a way that we could partner with them. The food bank can come in there. It just is big enough tent for everyone to be able to see and imagine themselves as a part of it.
So we have a couple of questions about people at different ends of the lifespan. One is, have you guys thought about ways to engage seniors in this work? And then the other question is, what role can young people play in the development and planning of complex collaboration
So
systems?
the first step of designing any Thriving Mind collaborative is talking to kids about what they care about. We heard the coach in here say, my job is to find out what is their spark and to light that spark. So we do a lot of, when we look at the content of individual programs, it's very kid-driven. I mean, we also talk to principals and teachers, and we're doing that too, but we're looking at how kids are going to engage. And in terms of seniors, we don't think of seniors as that we're doing direct service provision to them, but they are a tremendous workforce for this work. So, retired teachers with 30, 40 years experience are the ones that are going in and providing professional development for arts partners, for classroom teachers. Retirees in neighborhoods are coming in and working in after-school programs as teaching aides or as instructors. Many of them have skills to do that. So that population of retired folks are a real big juice in making something like this run.
And I'll just put in a plug, if you're interested in engaging older adults in arts learning, the National Guild's Creative Aging Program has lots of wonderful resources. There's a book, we do webinars, so a lot of good stuff there. Another couple of questions before we wrap up. One is, what kind of small, little opera company, a little community school of the arts do to get this? Do they have to just sit around and wait to be asked, or can they play a role in getting this going in their community? What advice do you have?
Lead from where you're planted. So if you're in a community and it's about gathering other people around an idea and not worrying about who's actually going to get credit for it or who's going to be the messenger. When you're going to go talk to the mayor and represent 120 agencies, you need to think about who that person is in your community they're going to send to have that conversation. It's not going to be me, right? It's going to be somebody or some group of people in my community that are going to go with our talking points and have that conversation. So it doesn't, and although we've talked about big systems partnerships here, programmatic partnerships are extremely powerful. So you're a small agency and you're thinking about how to increase your impact. There's a lot in the book about those kinds of partnerships too. And that's a great way to start on the road to partnership, is to do something, that's simple and manageable and kind of get your chops up around it.
Yeah. And then this is about large collaboration. It's just a very basic question. Where do you hold the meetings? And I think
there's a brilliant question.
Well, and it is about territory.
It's a brilliant question.
Right.
Everywhere in the world. I mean, we have professional development meetings every day, multiple ones at Big Thought all over our city. So, and this is also a way to sort of help your partners, rent their space for the meeting if you're going to have a meeting, use the facilities. Just like we need to have arts where children live, right? They need art in their neighborhood. It's not about going to the big institution in the middle of town. It needs to be in your neighborhood. It needs to be like drinking water, right? That you know how to get it. That's where you need to go talk to people too. You need to go to where people are that you want to talk to. Go to their house and talk to them there. Don't ask them to come to you. And that is actually a really great question, because it can be very strategic about where you have that meeting and use your public libraries, use your rec centers, use your community centers, use your schools. Although often parents will not come to schools for meetings, oddly enough. So that's also something to think about. Yeah.
So we have just a couple.
Churches, guys, don't forget your churches.
So we have just a couple minutes, and I wanted to ask if you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with folks.
I just want to say that, you know, I said it to you before. I said it is so fantastic doing this work. It feels so good to be able to move the needle on getting access for kids and on quality and on being able to do, you know, some of the things that I know we all want to be able to do, and to work in community with people that you never thought you'd be collaborating with. You know, my community policing chief, the second in command, not our police chief, but the guy right under him, is just, you know, a marshmallow. He's just the greatest guy. and he wants more than anything to have kids have great things to do between 3 and 6 o'clock at night. And so we, the cultural community, we are a godsend to him and he to us. You know, so really thinking outside that box. It is a great journey, and it is hard, but you know, you're working hard already. And you know, it just feels great. It feels great to do it.
Well, thank you. And Gigi, thank you for partnering with the National Guild and with the Opera America.
Thank you all.
It's been a terrific journey. We're gonna, as we mentioned a little earlier, we've been recording this, and we're gonna clean it up a little bit and post it online so that this too will be a resource that we hope you all will share. And we hope that we'll have the opportunity to partner with many of you in this room going forward and many of you watching online. So thank you again, Gigi. Thank you guys. And thanks for those of you out there. We'll see you next time.